The official justification for the inexplicable collapse of the Twin Towers was written by the National Institute of Standards and Technology. Between 2002 and 2006, they studied the demolition of the World Trade Center, reaching the conclusion that the collapse of the towers was caused by the combined effects of the impact of the airplanes and the resulting fires started by these impacts. We have been told by the very people who designed and built these towers that they should have resisted the impact of more than one airplane. We have to ask ourselves, did the engineers and architects imagine that airplanes could crash into the towers without any fuel? Perhaps they thought that the airplanes could get there by just blowing in the breeze.
Never before or after 9/11 have steel-framed towers collapsed due to fire.
In 2005, there was a fearsome conflagration in Madrid. A skyscraper went up in flames. It was a huge torch that kept burning for 20 hours. 20 consecutive hours. But in the end, the load-bearing structure remained intact. The skyscraper did not fall down. As you can see, the building is enveloped in flames. This skyscraper was not yet complete. It was still under construction. Nevertheless, it remained standing. Something you should note is the white color of the flames. This means that there is a lot of oxygen burning. If you look at the flames coming from the two towers in New York, we can see instead that the flames are dark red and the smoke is black.
The fires that were burning in these towers was a dark gray, a heavy, almost black gray smoke coming off. This implies an oxygen-starved fire.
Nevertheless, 55 minutes later, the whole tower collapses. According to the official NIST version of events, at a certain point, the steel structure of the towers gave way. It no longer had the structural strength that it had at the beginning. And all of this was supposed to be because of the immense heat. And here is something difficult to explain. We know that at some point certain people managed to walk down from the top of this tower and cross the point where the fire was strongest. Somehow they reached the bottom of the tower. How did they manage to do that?
I don't know. When I looked down there, I didn't see flames. I just sensed that it was the right thing to go and try and test it. We would go as far as we could until we were stopped by flames. And when we came to the 78th floor, the last layer was standing, but it was cracked. And there were flames licking up the other side of the wall like this. It wasn't a roaring inferno. I sensed that the flames were maybe starved for oxygen right there, you know, in the interior. We kept going, and we got onto the 74th floor. When we got down that far, normal conditions. The lights were on, fresh air coming up from below.
So the temperature inside the building was not particularly high, as we can see from the presence of this woman who is standing at the precise point where the plane impacted. In order to verify the way the buildings collapsed and how the heat had affected the steel, NIST commissioned numerous tests, some of which were conducted by a company called Underwriters Labs.
And Kevin Ryan, he's the former employee from Underwriters Laboratories who challenged the NIST report. And he went public with it. Within a week, he was fired from his job.
We did test the floor models in August of 2004. And those tests disproved the primary theory behind the collapse of the buildings. It was called the pancake theory. The floors would collapse upon each other into a stack of pancakes, and then the columns were no longer supported and the columns would fall apart. Well, the floor models didn't collapse in the tests, and these were in furnaces, testing furnaces, much hotter temperature, longer periods of time. They still didn't collapse. So yeah, a few months later, the government put out an update on their report. And they stated not only that the floors did not collapse, but they had done tests on the few samples they had saved from the fire zones. And those tests proved that the temperatures were very low. Temperatures were not hot enough to even soften steel. And yet, they're coming out with a summary statement that says that's what actually did happen, that the floors did collapse and the steel did soften. So they either downplayed those results or ignored those results, and they ended up putting it all in a computer.
Thanks to computers, NIST managed to straighten this problem out, and the old pancake theory was replaced by the inward bowing theory. According to the Institute, the heat weakened the floors, which started to curve downwards. The external walls of the towers also curved inwards until they could no longer bear the weight of the structures above, causing the towers to collapse.
Their final theory is almost entirely computer-based. And the computer itself is not really accessible. They haven't given it to us to examine. After having investigated it more over the last year and a half, I found that yes, they did contradict their test results, but additionally they also did manipulate the test parameters. They doubled one thing, they cut something else in half. For example, their story says that aircraft combustibles were at 13 tons in the aircraft cabin. The FAA says it's more like an average of 6.5 tons. It's double. So they double it. They double the time that their computer model exposes columns to fire, 90 minutes instead of what we know is 45 or 50 minutes in both of the buildings, actually. Well, they double it. They cut something else in half. Well, they double it.
One of the things that particularly struck me was the incredible speed with which the towers came down. There was something truly inexplicable about the speed of the collapse. If we dropped a weight from a height of around 400 meters, which was the height of the towers, the time it would take to reach the ground, supposing that there was not even any air resistance to slow down the speed of the fall, would take approximately 9 seconds.
Took about 8 or 10 seconds for the whole tower just to go straight down.
The impact was at about 2/3 of the way up the tower. Even if the section above collapsed suddenly due to the structure giving way, and even considering that the impact of the section above was enormous and therefore in some way weakened the resistance of the structures below, it is clear that, due to the resistance of the undamaged part below, this tower should not have fallen at such a speed. But it fell as if there was nothing below it, whereas there was an enormous structure below, a resistant structure that should have slowed down the speed of the collapse considerably.